Thank you, everyone, for being here today. This is really a treat for me to be able to be here as part of B-Side Dublin, although I wish very much that I could have been there in person, having a pint of the black stuff with you. But unfortunately, things being what they are, it has been an interesting year, to say the very least. So I am going to be talking today about trust. And a lot of this really centers around the core of what we all do as security practitioners. Now, we've talked a lot about things today that we're talking about, clicking on emails or, different types of confidence scams and things like that. And it's been amazing to see what we have seen over the course of the year where people have been, taking advantage of folks because they are working remotely and things to that effect. And we were promised, a brighter future. Unfortunately, we didn't get quite what we were looking for, but I think that we will definitely improve over time. So see if I can get that going there. So speaking of time, I got that right finally. This morning, I tried to join in to give my talk 4 hours early. Yeah. So when you have big, bold print across the top of a web page, even security practitioners do not necessarily read what is in bold. I really do miss the blink tag from days of old. So who am I? As Anthony was saying at the beginning, I do appreciate the intro. Typically now I don't do intros because it's more about talking about information that we can share with each other as opposed to who I am. If you really are, oh, that's a little odd. There we go. That's better. If you really want to talk more about things that I do, there's my LinkedIn. You can always contact me, and that information will be available at the end of the talk as well. So when we're looking back, this ugly little mutt was actually the star of the show for my keynote that I gave at B-Sides Dublin 3 years ago. And what the whole idea there was, we were talking about, the dog, the cat, the bumper. And the point here was security practitioners are now getting to that point where we are seen as one of the adults at the table. And I think it is really incumbent upon us to make sure that we don't mess it up. And I think we're doing a good job. I think we really have had a strange opportunity in light of the pandemic where we could be there as a voice of reason for dealing with remote employees and helping them understand how to better secure their environments as well as secure themselves. And we have to make sure that we also look at things like the human element. Trust is not a permanent state, and we have to make sure that we are building that trust with the end users. Because we've got to take a moment to realize that most of the people that are working remotely, before the pandemic, maybe they would work the occasional Friday. And we have to realize that this is not what most people are used to, even a year in. We have to make sure that as security practitioners, we are further building on that trust. So let's move on from there. Now, back in the 70s, yes, the gray is real. Back in the 70s, one of the things that I was very, very interested in the back of the comic books was there was this ad for X-ray vision glasses. I absolutely had to have these glasses. I was like, after my parents, I said, look, I really, really need these. How can I get these? I have the money. I'll give you the money. How do I send it? They fought me at every turn. At no point did it occur to my young brain that this was just a piece of cardboard and a pair of lenses, but I needed to have this because I trusted that it was an ad in the paper. I trusted that this was real, but it turned out not to be the case. Thankfully, I never did get these X-ray specs, but I do get to look back fondly at the silliness that was my point of view in the world. A little later on, I was into my early teens. Yeah, I started reading comic books again, and in the back, well, there was the switchblade comb. This time, I actually did send money. I think I was 11 at the time, to be honest. Sent cash in an envelope, and I would never dream of that these days. But back then, it didn't even occur to me that somebody would have swiped the money, but they didn't. They sent me the product. It was switchblade comb. And as soon as you would take it and you would click the button, it would swish open. And I thought, oh, this is awesome. The second time I did it, the comb went flying across the room. And I was like, well, that was $3 well spent. I had believed that this was going to be a solid product. Didn't occur to me that $3 was not going to get me anything worth anything. But that's just it. We get this sense of trust that we build up. Whether it's real or not, we have to make sure that we are understanding what is real from a trust perspective. When we were kids, promises were made. if you were reading popular science or popular mechanics or anything like that early on, there was always talk about, personal jetpacks, being able to fly everywhere. Those were the days, right? But the thing is, we really took that to heart in a lot of ways. And we have to make sure that we are not getting lost in the perception of what we think it should be and look at the reality of what we have to contend with. And as security practitioners, we do have a rather bad habit of, battling amongst ourselves. And I think that this helps to erode the trust that we are trying to build in the wider audience. So anyone who's ever been on social media understands the dumpster fire of inhumanity that it can be at the best of times. But there's also good to be pulled out of as well, of the interconnections with each other. We have to make sure that we avoid sliding down that slope into negativity, which is unfortunately far too easy to do. We got to go beyond where we have been to this point. So when I was in a role many years ago, I remember we found a security vulnerability in our organization that was going to stop a major product release. And I was like, this is really, really bad. We went in to talk to the CIO. We figured out a solution before we got to him. And we said, look, everything's on fire. This is why, and this is what we have to do. And he said, okay, I don't care if it's on fire. I don't care if there's a 0 day. I want to know what the cost is to the organization. What's the risk for the organization? What is the expectation of loss? I had to go, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms at that point. I just knew that this was really bad and that things could go horribly, horribly awry. So I had to reframe the conversation. And in order to do so, I had to work at imparting to the CIO what it was that I was really worried about and why this was a concern. And he gave me credit for coming in with a solution, but he had to have that explained to him in a way that made sense, because it was about reducing risk of the organization that would have fundamentally been a catastrophic failure. But coming in with my hair on fire saying, it's all bad, wasn't going to get the job done. So we got to look at the tools of the trade that we have to contend with. We have always been very keen about Nmap and all the rest of it, all these different types of tools, writing PowerShell scripts, whatever it happens to be. We all have our tool sets to get the job done. One of the things that we tend to shy away from collectively is what is typically called soft skills. And that's always sounds like it's, detracting from the term. It's not. It's about understanding how to deal with each other, how to deal with humans, how to communicate, because we need to build that trust. And in order to build the trust, we have to use the tools that may not be a script, may not be an application, maybe just learning how to communicate with each other. We also have to look at this in terms of, if there was a breach in your organization, how are you going to communicate with the wider audience? Who are you going to talk to? Who are your stakeholders? How are you going to speak to those stakeholders in terms that they'll understand and that you don't get lost in the fear, uncertainty, and doubt? Now, when we look back on what I was talking about a few moments ago about, buying things out of the back of a comic book, that could have gone horribly wrong for me insofar as I would have lost my money and I would have been a rather dejected 11-year-old. But today we see attackers that are playing on this very much on purpose. We look at, for example, dark patterns in user interfaces. When you have a user that is using a tool, you want to make sure that they are able to use it even if they're not technically adroit. If you're giving them a tool written by engineers for engineers, you're not necessarily going to get the results you're looking for. And when you're looking at dark patterns in user interface design, you're also looking at, the speck of dirt on the lens or on the glass, which it looks like, but it's actually, a flaw in the image that somebody may inadvertently touch. And then suddenly they've clicked on something they never had any intent to do so. A great example of this was Cory Doctorow posted a few years back now. If you'll notice in the circle on the slide, there's a little speck of dirt there, or what appears to be. So when people would click it, it would actually click the ad and go to another resource that the user never intended to do. This is why users have, over time, built an innate distrust for many things online, because attackers do play on this. They do find ways to make it as difficult as possible for people to trust. So we need to build that framework so that they can better understand how they can do things safely and securely. So there's different types of different types of dark patterns. We look at the bait and switch, confer shaming, and things like that, trick questions. I've had exams with questions that were innately wrong, but they were trick questions in order to get a response. And they wanted to see how we responded. Didn't care for that much. Or the bait and switch. You go to buy something on eBay and it's like, oh, product A. And then the seller comes back, oh, product A is actually sold out right now, but we'll give you product B for the same price. It's like, these are the reasons that people lose their ability to trust. And other techniques are, intuitive UI abuse, like the, hidden image file that is on there, or the X that isn't an X. If you go to click it, it actually activates an application as opposed to closing the window. As security people, we hope that we're going to not make these mistakes, but we do make these mistakes. Look at me. I showed up 4 hours too early for my talk. I blame my PTO. But as we're going through it, we're looking at this sort of UI abuse, like different types of colors and things like that are used in applications or web pages, is pervasive. And I've had screenshots that my 75-year-old mother has sent me where I would have got it wrong. And she's looking at it and she's like, there's something just wrong here, which speaks volumes to the fact that she now listens to me. And it only took, quite a long time. But it's really great that she is now suspicious enough that she's like questioning, what is this and how can I trust this particular website? The goal here is we want to make sure that security decisions are in their best interest, and them being the end users and ourselves as well. We don't want people to make security decisions based on the fact that, oh, wait, I'll get a $200 or €200 gift card from Amazon. Yet nobody's going to give you that. That's not going to happen. You fill out a survey, they're not sending you that. They would say, oh, you have a chance to win. That's different. But if they say, we'll send it to you, that's where the red flag should be going up. Now, malicious design is definitely a key piece here. And this is one of those things where users are going to not see it, like what the screenshots that my mother was sending me, where I would look at it and I'm like, this is intuitively wrong. But only a designer could see that. And you want to make sure that this isn't something that is a pervasive issue. We have to find ways to better communicate to the end users and provide them tools to keep them safe and secure as well. We need to make it harder for the attackers to do their job. Because fundamentally, we can't trust ourselves. Odd as that might sound. We have to find out a way to structure this so that we are saving ourselves from ourselves, because we do make bad choices. Let that sink in for a second. Because we have our bias, whatever that might be. We'll say, oh, no, I'm not biased. Everybody's biased. It's just that is their view of the world. That is their particular bias. That may skew data in a survey. That may skew data in a focus group. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you have to be aware that it exists. And the same thing can be had when you're talking about artificial intelligence as an example. You'll have biases that are built into it using algorithms because the algorithms are written by humans. So we've seen examples where bad things can happen. Ahmed El-Azhari, El-Azhari, she came up with a proposal of a bug bounty for bad algorithms. And you know what? I absolutely agree with this. This is an absolutely fantastic idea, because we have seen applications that would mischaracterize people based on facial scans or whatever it happened to be of their images, and they would get them categorically wrong. Was this malicious? To be determined, but in a lot of cases, it's mainly just people didn't do it right. They didn't write the algorithms correctly. And these are the kind of things that really, really resonate with me. Those things that we have to address to help improve the trust factor with the end users. Because otherwise we end up with, instead of capabilities, an incapability of the inability to get things done in a safe and secure manner and to further improve things on a global scale. And when I say that, look at the pandemic we are dealing with right now. We're a year in, and by and large, we're still muttering along. Can you imagine if this had taken place in 2003? Would we have been able to get things done? Sure, but nothing to the scale and efficiency that we have now. And that's one of those things that we have to be sure that we realize that how far we have come in a short period of time. Because SARS back in 2003, I had to contend with it when I was dealing with the power company. Not that I got it, that we had to prepare the company for it. And when we were going through and looking at all the documentation, looking at everything, we realized that how flat-footed we had been caught out and how horrible things had gone if, in fact, it was something akin to what we're dealing with today with COVID. You look at the business continuity and the DR documents and things like that, and the vast majority of them say, oh, just pop around to the shop and get X number of laptops in the event that our building is hit by a meteor. That doesn't scale. And security experts, we make mistakes. We all do. Everybody makes mistakes. And this is a great example here. This was an article written by David Spark where a former security person became a developer and started his own company and made a lot of basic security mistakes. I won't name who this is not the point of this, but that's just to show that we're human. And we have to be aware of this, and we have to build frameworks that are going to further improve things overall. Now, another example of how things can be messed with is corrupting data. We always talk about websites being breached and data being stolen, but what if a website was breached and somebody just altered a little bit? A financial institution here in Canada, quite a few years ago now, they promoted new code into production. Everything worked in test. But when they promoted it to production, it failed, and it catastrophically failed, and they were out for 6 days because there was one semicolon in the wrong place. Took down the whole website. These are the kind of things that we don't often take into account. We have to make sure we have a good way to address these sort of things. And an example here with David Sutter, this was an example where there was a data leak of emails, and it was made to look like he was actually working with the CIA. And again, this wasn't actually the case. This was somebody had changed the data. And this subtle, changes in data in order to change the narrative is another problem that we have to contend with as well. And here's another example here with a changes to a document as well that changed these text. Well, the ever have that moment where you trip on your tongue? Yeah, this is it. That changed the meaning of the information that was released. And this is really about denial of trust. And we have to figure out ways to defend against denial of trust. Because if the users don't believe what they're seeing, and if they don't believe, how can we get them to do things in a safe and secure manner if they are just of a mind that everything is wrong and everything is horribly broken? If we're able to trust ourselves and then we earn that trust from others, that is a way to build things going forward. But as we've seen with, ordering out of comic books, of dark patterns, things like that, we fundamentally can't trust ourselves. So we have to find ways to help ourselves to trust ourselves. And that sounds a little bit odd, but bear with me. So how do we earn that trust? Well, we do it with honesty, transparency, predictability, capability, willingness to correct mistakes, like showing up 4 hours early and falling on your sword for it, and accountability. These are things that we can fundamentally take into our everyday lives to improve things. When you have something like a community like B-Sides Dublin, you have the ability to come together as a group, as a family, and share how we can improve things going forward. And remember when Microsoft came out with the trustworthy computing? That really did change things for them. It was a stake in the ground. They said, this is what we have to do to improve things going forward. And it worked. Microsoft has done a very good job on security in the intervening years. And this is just an example of many where we can show how we can improve things overall for the wider audience. So people like to say horrible things about zero trust. I've heard them all. But the core fundamentals behind zero trust are ones that actually make sense. It's built on actionable info, network zone segmentation, users, device management, all of these different types of things to help layer security controls into your organization. And zero trust, while it was a buzzword that came out in 2010-ish, it really has served its purpose. It got people to pay attention. So how do we move on from that? Well, we have to say, yes, that was a good starting point, but we got to build on that. So I gave a talk in Singapore a couple of years ago where I got up on stage and I talked about zero trust, and half the audience had no idea what I was talking about. And that really surprised me because I naively thought, because I had my bias, that everybody was talking about zero trust in some form or another. I was wrong. And when I had that conversation after I got off the stage with a few people, they actually found it very negative to call it zero trust. I took their point. It does have a bit of a negative connotation. So if you can take the same thing and then call it something like continuous trusted access, then it actually seems a little bit more fluid and a little bit more sensible for people going forward in the long term. Now, when we are born, we default to trust. This is what we have to do in order to survive. As an infant, we're looking for food, we're looking for shelter. We need to do this. We need to trust folks. But in the world of the internet, we really have to take our time to make sure that it's trust but verified and verified again. There's a great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers. He really delves into the communication breakdowns that happen between individual groups, individual people, and how you can better bridge that gap. So we as security practitioners, while we were having the rallying cry a couple of years ago of being the adult in the room, now we have to be the great communicators. We have to find the way to have the conversation with the wider audience. We got to have to get away from navel gazing, because when we're talking amongst ourselves, that's all well and good. But if we're not communicating to the wider audience, one, we're losing that ability to build the trust with the wider audience and establish ourselves and our bona fides. I always have to work in my coffee breaks. Thank you for smiling, Anthony. I saw that. So we want to make sure that we're not trusting something simply because it's inside the firewall. Now, this actually happened to me at a company I worked at quite a few years ago, actually. We had a vulnerability test that was done for the external, and the attacker said, here's all the official attackers said, here's all the things that we have to contend with, all the things that we have to fix. And the inside of the network was a flat network, and you could basically go anywhere. The CIO said that didn't really matter. He said, fundamentally, we trust everyone who works here. In hindsight, I know there was at least 2 people there that we shouldn't have been trusting outright, but I won't go any further down that road. But this is one of those things that just because you are, part of the same organization, you have to make sure that you're taking steps to secure that organization. Sure, you may trust them. You may go out for a pint with them after work. But whoops has happened. And it might not ever be any sense of malice that something goes awry, but we have to make sure that we are putting a framework in place to avoid those sort of issues. Passwords, I love to beat up on passwords. It's the same thing as if you put your house key under your doormat when you go to work, knowing that your kids are going to get home early so they can get in the house. But the attackers know this too. So just because you know that your child is going to use that key doesn't mean the attacker isn't the one coming through the front door to rob you and take your stuff. These are the kind of things we have to make sure that we're doing a better way to improve authentications. Trust is about granting access without verifying. We're born, we're looking for food, we're crying, we just accept that our parents are our parents. But trust about granting access because you're verified is an improvement on that. So as we grow older, we learn more, we become hopefully wiser. I'm still working on that. But these are the kind of things we need to address, because the erosion of trust is all around us. We have psychological operations units that are going online all the time. There was one that absolutely floored me just 48 hours ago. I was reading about it, where this person was saying that their relative had gotten the vaccine, had gone blind, but the date that they said they had received the vaccine was at least a month before any vaccine was even available. Also, it was one of those Twitter accounts with all the numbers at the end, so it's like high probability of being a fake one to start with. Then we have to look at data misuse. There are so many organizations out there that are always constantly harvesting information. How are they protecting that information? We've seen talks today where people are talking about homomorphic encryption and different types of ways to breach different web applications. And we have to make sure that we are constantly iterating through to improve the security of the organization. Because this amount of data that we're collecting is of value not only to the organization, but to the criminal element as well. If they're able to get their hands on this, virtually. This information could be a huge boon for them financially. And then there's the ever-present data breach. Data breaches, we've been dealing with them forever. I mean, back in 2012, I started tracking them on myself on the back of the napkin because I found it really odd how many that were ticking upwards. And now if you go to sites like I've talked about this in the past, informationisbeautiful.net, if you look at their site, it's absolutely stunning. They have a visual representation of data breaches there, which is really something to see. We can do better than this. So how has trust become an attack system? We look at integrity attacks, subtle overt corruptions of data. So you changing that one character in the data to take down an entire website. And then accusing somebody of a data breach. How often have we seen certain people in the industry say, oh, does anybody know somebody at this particular company? I have a question. Usually everybody goes nuts. It's a data breach. It has to be. They wouldn't ask otherwise. Meanwhile, it's just like, no, I got my card stuck in an ATM and I just want to know how to get it out. We have to make sure that we take a step back anytime we see any sort of issue and say, okay, what is Occam's razor as applied to this? What is making the most sense? I've seen entire websites go down where people are like, it's a breach, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs. I'm like, having worked in organizations where I had to maintain websites for large corporations for better part of 20 years, I know more often than not, it's like something just went wrong. A system failed, whatever it happens to be. It didn't fail over cleanly. We got to make sure that we're not just running around with our hair on fire. If we want to look at how to improve things, we got to look at some of the core tenets. We have to look at, yet another triad. We always heard, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Sure, that was a great back of the napkin, last minute addition to a deck that we're still dealing with today. But a simple way to look at when you're protecting an organization is about, how do you protect the users? How do you protect the devices that are attached to your network? And how do you protect the applications that you need to protect your organization? Zero trust or continuous trusted access is a really good way to look at this. When we look at our ecosystem, everything we have to deal with, it's actually stunning how many holes there are in the perimeter that we once knew. So the perimeter, as we knew it in the past, is gone. Let's be completely honest with ourselves. Being an archaeology student, believe it or not, before I ever got into computers, there was a story that I always loved to tell where the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome. And they did it by surrounding the city and waiting until they ran out of supplies. They didn't fire a shot, not a single arrow, not a single rock. They just waited. It worked. The Romans ran out of food. They opened the doors. The Visigoths took the city. Nowadays, we've, bearing in mind that was 2,000 years ago, give or take, we have shown that traditional perimeter approach is a broken methodology. We have to look at things about, where is an access decision being made as the perimeter now. Zero trust, love it or hate it, that term has some merit. More so the meat behind it as opposed to the name. We have to make sure we're getting back to the core fundamentals. All of the things that we should have been doing for the last 30 years, network zone segmentation and what have you. Look at this. We're here. We go through the steps here. Establishing trust in your users. Are the users in your environment the ones that are supposed to be there? Or are you running based on passwords and somebody left a sticky note in an airport lounge, which I found more than a few times, and then gaining access to resources? If I was someone of a negative bent, there are many different companies I could have had access to. There was a company in the past where I was able to get access to all of their software repository because they had a username of admin and a password of license 123. That just breaks my heart. So once you have the trust in the user identity, you want to make sure that you're looking at the devices that are attaching to your network. Is there some Canadian coming in with an Xbox first generation using that for SSL? Or is it a corporate-owned asset that's supposed to be attaching to the network? I may or may not have done that. You want to ensure the trustworthiness of the devices. You want to make sure they're patched to current or N-1. And then have policies that you can apply. If you have somebody in finance that is suddenly showing up in Toronto, Canada, and all of your operations are in Ireland, you may want to have a question. You may want to say, okay, wait, why is this happening? As you go through this, as you iterate through, you get closer and closer to a continuous trusted access type of mindset, framework, whatever you want to call it. It's all about reducing risk. It's not about some sort of flashy logo or sticker or nice t-shirt. You want to make sure you're reducing the risk in your organization, because we all have a fiduciary responsibility to protect our organizations, to protect our assets, to protect the people that we are there to champion. You want to go through and verify the users, verify the devices, and verify the applications, because the applications are really key, especially now that we have pivoted to basically a remote workforce for the better part of the last year around the world. So they're getting their email from SaaS-based implementations. There are things like Salesforce, whatever you have, all web delivered. If you are not marshaling control of access for that, you are really opening yourselves up to potential problems. So if you have, Dave sitting at a Tim Hortons in Toronto, Canada, accessing your servers in Dublin because I could get direct access to it and I found the username and password, this is a problem. So we have to look at reducing that risk and doing a better job of that. Because the attackers will love to, well, that slide blew up. So the attackers are going to try any way they can to get in, because it's about financial gain at this point. Back in the days of Zone H and all those other Aldas and all the rest of those web boards that said, greets to my friends, I hacked your website, ha ha ha, and have all the screenshots of that. That has evolved into big business, and we're talking millions of dollars. So why make it easier for them? If they have the ability to get a username and password, that's part of their job done. If you can do something like multi-factor authentication, biometrics, anything like that, anything that makes it more difficult for the end user, that's great. There's an open standard. I'll say that again, an open standard by the W3C called WebAuthn, or about WebAuthn rather. If you take nothing else away from today, that's actually an excellent piece of documentation to read, because it's an open standard and it is a way to move forward to what is ostensibly called a passwordless future, a way to do authentications that will obviate the need for passwords. So there's your homework assignment. I'll just keep going from there. And you want to make sure that the devices that are attaching to your network have good hygiene, because you don't want to introduce problems that don't have to be there. And with this remote workforce that we have to contend with on a continuous basis, we want to make sure they're not inadvertently introducing problems that, because they were not connecting their laptop for long periods of time, that they suddenly had a library that didn't get updated. The attacker was able to breach them with an email. You want to make sure that you are not making that easier for the attacker. Because if you take every portion of the business and drop them into buckets, you have the workplace, the workforce, and the workload. 3 core components of your organization. Fundamentally, you can put everything in. The people, the devices, the applications. And we want to make sure that we are approaching this in a way that we're going to put our arms around it to better secure our environments. We have to make sure that we're dealing with user trust. You don't, I tell this over and over again, but this one organization I worked at, we did a quick assessment of, well, not quick assessment, an assessment of all the user accounts in our organization. And the reason I tell this every time is because this is just absolutely gobsmacking to me. We had 10 users with super user status. One was deceased, had been deceased for 5 years, but their account had been used in the last 2. None of those 10 people were still with the organization. I apologize to people who have seen me talk about that over and over again, but this is just one of those things I used to hit the point home. Then you want to do discovery. You want to go through your network, go through your organization, and look at what you have connected to the wire. Because I guarantee you, it's not what you think it is. I know, because when I had to do a rollout of a particular antivirus client, I found there was at least double the number of nodes on the network than our inventory thought there was. You want to have the ability to trust the nodes that are in your organization, be they remote or in a building one day, hopefully. You want to be able to be assured what it is that's attaching to your organization. And if you have an untrusted device that suddenly shows up on the network, you want to be able to be aware of it and be able to address it as well. How trustworthy are those devices that are attached to your network? Have you gone through and looked and, is Dave coming in on that Xbox again? Yes, I did do that in one organization. And yes, they did try to get me fired for that, but I showed them I was doing security testing because I was a security guy. Anyway, suffice it to say, nobody knew until I told them. And I guarantee that sort of behavior happens all over the place. And this wasn't a case of me trying to be malicious. It was a case of, I was like, oh, wait, there's a web browser in here. Will this work? And by and large, a lot of the whoops factors happen because of stuff like that. And then there's security debt. Everybody in every organization who's ever worked has at least seen one of these. The beige desktop on or under a desk that is running a mission critical application written by a summer student that nobody knows how to port it off of there, but they can't let it go down. This is a problem. And I use this as an example because this happens in organizations over and over again. We have to make sure we're building trust in the users, but we also have to give them the tools in order to establish that trust. So if you're running on deprecated hardware, deprecated software, you are really setting yourself up for a possible cascade failure, as we've seen with multiple types of supply chain issues over the last few months. You want to be able to enforce adaptive policies in your organizations so that, somebody in finance is not suddenly doing maintenance work on a back-end system or doing changes on a router. I actually have been in an organization where we did have a CFO making router changes because he got tired of waiting for a change request. Yeah, that went well. And the types of policies that you want to look at, you want to what makes sense for your organization. Don't let any vendor come in and say, you have to have this with the blinky lights. No, what's your list of requirements? What are you trying to save in your environment? What are you trying to protect? So if you have the ability to spell that out before you talk to any vendor, that's a huge win. I've had vendors in the past that came in to see me when I was on the other side of the phone, and they said, oh yeah, our particular software will protect your applications. And I was working for a power company. And I said, oh, okay, well, we're running systems that are True 64, the Unix variant. And will it work on there? I was like, oh yeah, it'll work on True 64, True 32, no problem. No such thing. So this is one of the things. That's why you have to have a clear, defined list of requirements, because sometimes people will sell you anything just to get into the door. So we have to make sure that we are pushing back and having a larger conversation with folks, because it's incumbent upon us to raise all boats. And if somebody out there is doing something silly, we need to call them on it. And I mean that gently, because we can improve. And we have to make sure that we're protecting every application out there that we need to access, because we need to keep the lights on. Now, back in February, March timeframe, when all of this started going sideways, we realized very quickly that there were times where we had to make judgment calls. We had to make sure that we were looking at how we're going to improve things for the organization by accepting risks that we would not have otherwise accepted, because we had to keep the business going. Sorry, a little thing blinked on my screen there. So we want to make sure that we are protecting all of those applications to keep the lights on. But when we make those risk-based decisions and we accept those risks, that we go back and revisit them, because otherwise they too will help add into the security debt that we can accumulate over time. We need to make our own jetpacks. That might sound trite, but we were promised. So rather than waiting around for somebody to deliver it to us, we need to do a better job collectively. And I see that security practitioners, we have become, the voice of reason in many organizations. And I think that this is only going to continue as long as we realize that we need to be the adults. We need to have the conversation about risk. We need to have the conversation in the lingua franca that the people we're talking to understand. Trust is neither binary or permanent. We have to make sure that we are constantly working to maintain that. What happens in a community without trust? What happens in a society without trust? Everything falls apart. We can't afford that. We need to be sticking together. Seems I have doubled the slide. And we have to go through and reinforce that trust with prevention, detection, and correction. These are the things that we need to make sure that we're constantly iterating through, because when you're looking at a continuous trusted access or zero trust, or however it makes most sense to you, we have to be constantly iterating through. There's no end state that you're going to get to where you're going to be zero trust certified. That flat out doesn't exist. But it is a way to reduce risk in the organization and improve things over the long term. Continuous trust access, data validation, transparency, accountability, these are all good things. Pineapple on a pizza, not so much. Yes, we invented that in Canada. Yes, we're still sorry. trustworthy data and systems can't be separated from, trustworthy people. We have to make sure that we are working on how we can best validate all of this, because let's be honest, mistakes are going to happen. I know, cheap shot, couldn't resist, but it is kind of an evergreen statement. We can all look towards a brighter future as we're going forward. And I would like to thank everyone here at our B-Sides Dublin, and hope that I can be there in front of you again sometime in the future to, raise a pint of the black stuff at the very least. But thank you all today for your time. And I really do appreciate the chance to be here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. It was nice seeing you twice today. The talk was great, and you've opened up a Pandora's box now, because once these videos go up on YouTube for the general public, there's going to be a brand new type of business going on where they're going to be offering zero trust certification to companies. So thanks.
Well, if they do that, I will have a serious, nasty conversation with them.
That's brilliant. I'll give people a minute just to see if there's any questions. There's nothing in so far.
No worries. They can always drop me a line.
But lots of people saying thanks. They love the talk. So the feedback is very good. People were delighted to see your slide with unicorn coffee. So we got that going.
Awesome.
That's brilliant. Thank you again. Hopefully next time in physical proximity.
I would like nothing less.